Hi everyone! In this last video, I would like to introduce to you some other effective ways to motivate students to learn a second language. They can be classified into two categories: presenting tasks in a motivating way and setting specific learner goals. First and foremost, tasks must be presented in a motivating way. Sometimes it is easier said than done, but we should make learning stimulating and enjoyable. The fact is that some topics we teach are unlikely to interest students, even though it is in their interest to learn them. This is when motivational techniques related to how to present and administer tasks come in particularly useful. The way we present tasks can make a huge difference in how students perceive and approach them. With a proper introduction, even a grammatical substitution drill can be made exciting. So, what is a proper introduction in the motivational sense? Besides the traditional purpose of task instructions, namely to describe what students will be doing, what they will have accomplished when they are finished, and how this accomplishment will be evaluated, the motivational introduction of an activity fulfills at least three further functions. It explains the purpose and the utility of the task. It whets the student's anticipation of the task, and it provides appropriate strategies for doing the task. It is of vital importance to explain the purpose and the utility of a task. Even experienced teachers sometimes expect students to carry out a task without offering them any real explanation about the purpose of the activity. Students are too often required to do things in the classroom just because the teacher says so. In civilian context, the usual way of asking people to do something involves communicating good reasons to them as to why the particular activity is meaningful or important. And I can't see why the introduction of learning tasks should not follow this pattern. If we want our students to give their best when attending to a task, they need to see the point in what they do. In accordance, it may be useful to cover these points when presenting a task. We need to emphasize that the task is a learning opportunity to be valued rather than an imposed demand to be resisted. We must explain where the activity fits in within a sequence or bigger picture and how it relates to the overall goals of the class. Also, it is necessary to describe the intended purpose of the activity and what this implies about how students should respond to it. For example, what they should concentrate on or be particularly careful about. Lastly, we must try and make a connection between the task and the student's personal daily life and point out how the skills learned will be useful in enabling them to achieve real-life agendas. Next, we need to whet the student's appetite. Good task introductions raise the student's expectations of something interesting and important to come. You can do this by projecting intensity and enthusiasm when you introduce the activity, communicating your expectation for students to succeed, asking the students to make guesses and predictions about the upcoming activities. For example, what is going to be covered, how long a listening passage will take, etc. Pointing out challenging or important aspects of the L2 content to be learned, or adding a twist to routine activities. For example, asking them to do a grammar drill very fast or whispering. The final aspect of a good task is providing appropriate strategies to do the task. A good task introduction concerns the strategy that students should apply to complete the task successfully. When a teacher presents what could be considered a very creative communicative activities, Some of the learners may simply do not concentrate enough on the teacher's instructions to understand what is required of them, and others do not really know how to go about completing the task. Therefore, the task instruction should spell out exactly what students need to do immediately after the instruction is over. The best way to demonstrate the necessary strategies and skills is to model them, which means never explain, demonstrate. You can do this, for example, by pretending to be a student and performing various roles, or you can ask volunteers to act out your guidelines. Another less common used way is the think aloud technique, which involves saying out loud the various steps taken in approaching and dealing with an issue, and how performing a complex task can be broken down into smaller steps. It is also useful to remind students of previously learned knowledge or skills that they can make use of during task completion. Before making a bigger assignment, you can also get the whole class to brainstorm list of strategy for getting the project done. Another important issue is setting specific learner goals. Here, we will address how specific and short-term goals can help the learner to structure the learning process. This is particularly important in learning a subject such as an L2, where even acquiring a minimum working knowledge may take several years. It is simply unreasonable to expect that the ultimate purpose of the learning process, that is, to communicate it with L2 speakers or to understand L2 products, won't be strong enough during all this time to maintain the original motivation momentum. In such situations, specific short-term goals, often referred to as proximal sub-goals in the psychological literature, might provide immediate extra incentives. At the same time, goals are not only outcomes to shoot for, but also standards by which students can evaluate their own performance and which mark their progress. This is the basis of having great exams or graded certificates in many subject areas, such as learning to swim or play the piano. Natural sub-goals within the L2 learning context are forthcoming tests, exam, or competition, but goal setting is not restricted to such official events. Personal goals such as reading a chapter of a book every weekend or learning 10 new words every day may energize learning just as well. Goal setting is basically a simple planning process that can be learned relatively easily. However, what we need to do is to show students how to break down tasks and assignments into smaller steps, how to assign deadlines to this, and how to monitor their own progress. Malcolm and Pope in 1994 offer a straightforward template for students with the following 7 steps. Step 1. Define your goals clearly. Step 2. List steps to take to reach this goal. Number 3. Think of problems that might come up that would interfere. Number 4. Think of solutions to this problem. Next, set a timeline for reaching the goal. 6. Evaluate your progress. And 7. Reward yourself for accomplishment. What are the characteristics of the goals that work best? Donnie, in 2001, has compiled the following set of principles. Goals should be clear and specific, describing concrete outcome in as much detail as possible. Measurable, describing the outcome in terms that can be clearly evaluated. Challenging and difficult, but not outside the range of students' capabilities. And realistic. Secondly, goals should have a stated completion date. Thirdly, both short-term and long-term goals should be set. Fourth, Teacher should provide feedback that increases the student's capability of and confidence in obtaining the goal. Another interesting motivating concept is learning contracts. This is a formal agreement, often termed a learning contract or a learning itinerary, which is negotiated between teachers and students. Such contracts can vary in detail and elaborateness. Besides describing a series of sub-goals that lead to a larger goal and the level of effort to do with this, they may also contain specifications of the teaching method, the schedule of various course components such as test, game, projects, and the reward or grade or other outcome. Specific contracts could, for example, detail agreement about what is to be done from the beginning to the end of a project or during a term, or after completing a specific section of the curriculum or coursebook. Although this method is time-consuming, it does ensure active teacher-student negotiation about goal setting, and it formalizes students' commitment to goals. Contracts are not limited to individual students. The teacher may enter into an agreement with the whole class, in which case the contract will be similar to a formalized set of class rules, although with more emphasis on specific outcomes. Before we finish, I would like to raise a question to you. How can you motivate your students to speak English instead of their native language? Please spend 30 seconds to think about possible ways. And now, we will watch a video related to this issue, in which an expert in language teaching advises how to solve this problem.
Małgorzata Woźczyk from Poland asked, "My students are always using their native language in the classroom. How can I motivate them to speak English instead?" I don't think it's a problem if you or your students use the native language occasionally in class. Use of the first language from time to time can be very helpful to clarify the meaning of unfamiliar vocabulary words or difficult concepts. Of course, if your students are using their first language all the time, then that's another story. And I think the question here is, why are they doing that? Some students are reluctant to use English in the classroom because they're afraid of making a mistake and perhaps being criticized by the teacher or embarrassed in front of their classmates. What you can do in this case is to try to make your classroom a very, very safe place to make mistakes. Encourage students to experiment. Let them know that a mistake or an error is not the end of the world. I recently visited a program where there was a poster on the wall that said, "The expert in anything was once a beginner." If you can let your students know that it's okay to make mistakes, that your classroom is a safe place, hopefully this will motivate them to speak more English.
What do you think about his advice? Do you think that there are other ways to motivate your students to use English? Please share your opinion with other peers. To wrap up, I would like you to remember this strategy to motivate learner. First, present and administer tasks in a motivating way. More specifically, explain the purpose and utility of a task. Whet the students' appetite about the contents of the task, and provide appropriate strategy to carry out the task. Secondly, use goal-setting methods in your classroom. More specifically, encourage learners to select specific short-term goals for themselves, and emphasize goal completion deadlines and offer ongoing feedback. Lastly, use constructing methods with your students to formalize their goal commitment. More specifically, draw up a detailed written agreement with individual students or home group that specify what they will learn and how, and the ways by which they will help and reward them. Monitor students' progress and make sure that the details of the contract are observed by both parties. Thank you.